You know what's really annoying? That. I'm going to show you how to avoid that right now. So you're trying to hang a picture or whatever, and you're trying to find a stud without a stud finder because you don't have one or you found out they're not that great. Well, I'm going to show you how to do that. Basic construction is 16-inch on center. So what that means is when you build a wall, you start from the outside wall and you go 16 inches to the center of the stud, and then another 16 inches to the center of that stud, and so on and so forth. And obviously you're going to have windows and stuff in between, but that is 16 inches on center. So in order to find a stud, a good start is to look for electrical outlets. In most cases, almost in all cases, unless you've remodeled the room and you put in what's called an old work box, which just attaches to the sheetrock on the backside, your electrical outlets are going to be attached to a stud. The boxes will be attached to a stud. So there is a stud either on this side of the outlet or this side of the outlet. A good way to figure this out is, here's an outlet. That's the outside wall. This is the corner of the house. And I'm going to take a tape measure and I'm going to measure behind this cabinet to the outside of the wall here. And if you look here, you see 32 inches, and that's on the left side of this outlet. So it goes 16, 32, and that is 16 inches on center. So that's a good indication that the house was built properly. And it's not exact because you have, a 1/2 inch with the sheetrock out there, and there's other things that could have happened. But basically what my tape is telling me is there's a stud on this side of the outlet. Now, knowing that, you know that it's 16 inches on center, you should be able to find a stud in this entire wall. Tape measures are marked every 16 inches. You see 16, all in the red, 32, 48, 64, 80, and so on. So if I took my tape and I held it down there about where that stud is on the left side of the box, and then you look down the tape and you look here, and you see that 96 inches, 8 feet, is on the left side of this box. So that tells me that there's a stud right here. So I could put my level right here and plumb this up and hang a picture right there. And I could measure off of this another 16 inches this way if I didn't want it, right over a plug. And I could go up and hang a picture or do whatever I had to do into the stud right there. Now I know not every house is going to be built this way, and in fact this is a United States thing as far as I know. I know a lot of European homes are built with concrete and brick, and probably way better. But if things are off, if you find out that that your house is built 16 inches on center, then that'll give you a good indication of every room in your house. Unless you have a remodel and it wasn't built properly, then it's going to be a little trickier, but I do have some tips for that as well. So the first tip is same thing. An electrical outlet, there's either a stud on this side or a stud on this side. So to find out which side the stud is on is a little trickier. Sometimes you can follow this down and you can look at the baseboard, and this is where shoddy work comes in handy, because if you can see nail holes in your baseboard, then you kind of have an idea that that's where the stud is. So this will give you the preliminary, okay, there's a stud somewhere here. Then you go down and you say, okay, where, and say the nails are right here. Okay, it's on the left side of this stud, or the left side of this box. Another way you can tell is if you take this cover off, you can take this cover off, and sometimes, very carefully, do not put your screwdriver inside of this box, but you can kind of go to the outside here, and like there's a hole right there. So I can tell there is nothing right there. But on this side, that means there's a stud on this side of the box. The stud is 1.5 inches. You measure this way, 3/4 of an inch, and plumb your line up wherever you want, whatever it is, and you'll find the stud. And again, you can measure off of this, typically 16 inches either way, and you should find a stud. Just like being able to find nails in the baseboard that you can see to know that there's a stud there, when you don't do a perfect job on the wall, you can sometimes look down the wall. I'll try and find an example here. I did this, so I hope that I don't find an example. But if you look down the wall, you're going to look for imperfections. If the mud wasn't done perfectly, or if there's a seam that you can see. Not to brag, but I did a pretty good job here. Let me see if I can find an imperfection, and I'll show you what I'm talking about. Okay, right there. You can just barely make out some seam tape right there, which means that 2 pieces of sheetrock came this way, and that is where the seam is. The seam has to be on a stud, basically, in order to attach it to the wall. So right there is going to be a stud, and you can see some up here. You can barely see it. You have to really look for it. But there's a seam right there, so there's a stud right there. Other things that are good to know is doorways. On either side, there's going to be 2 studs typically. One here, right next to each other. So there's going to be 3 inches of stud there that you could nail to. And that's how you nail the trim to it. For instance, here, there's 2 studs, and then I believe I put another stud in here to get the switch away from the wall, or away from the door. So that's, you know, those particular situations are gonna happen. There's gonna be studs where you're not expecting them, and there's gonna be no studs where you are expecting them. But typically in doorways, you're gonna have 2 studs here, 2 studs here, and then it's gonna go up to a header. On inside walls that aren't bearing walls, you're going to have 2 studs going this way, and then you're going to have pieces of 2x4 that go up this way. So in this doorway, there was 2 studs, 1, 2, and know that the plates that surround this stuff are bigger than the actual switch and the box. So the box probably ends right about here. You go 1.5 inches and 1.5 inches, and there's your 3 inches with your 2 studs right here. Same thing with windows. On the sides, there should be 2 studs. One, and you should know that this is not where you should measure from. Usually this is 3/4 of an inch, and then there's going to be a gap here, so that's called a rough opening, and that's so you can kind of level and plumb the window however you want. So there's going to be a gap there, so it probably starts about here, 1.5 inches, 1.5 inches, and then you go up. This is good for hanging curtains like I did here. I knew that there was going to be studs there, so that's where I hung these curtains. Any wall that has a window on it is going to be an outside wall, so there should be a proper header up here, either a 2x6 or a 2x8. So about 5.5 to 7.5 inches up from 3/4 gap up here is going to be solid. This is should all be solid wood, so you could get something in there. In the corners of a room, there's always going to be a 2x4 here and a 2x4 here. There's always going to be something that you can screw to in here. And these rules kind of apply to a ceiling, because ceiling joists, typically, depending on the way your house is built, are going to go this way, 16 inches on center, and then the strapping, which is what the sheetrock or whatever ceiling you have actually attaches to, is going to run this way, 16 inches on center. So even if you can't find the strapping, which is probably what you want to find with whatever you're hanging, you could also get into a ceiling joist that would be much stronger. Another tip is in regards to inside walls. I'm on the opposite side of the room that I was just in. I'm in the master bedroom, and this wall, for instance, I know that there is a stud right here. I've done my research and I figured out, see, if you go down here, that's a good example. You can see the nail hole right here. So the stud is on this side of the outlet. Maybe there's not a box on the other side and I don't know, and that's where I want to hang something on that wall. I know that this wall is going to be the same thing on the opposite side, because you put 2x4s up, you put sheetrock on one side, you put sheetrock on the other side. So if I measured in here to that wall and then came down here, I'll say 41.5 inches is the center of that stud. So now if I went over here on the opposite side and I measure from that wall down here, and I know that at 41.5 inches, right where my finger is going to be a stud. And in fact, if you go up this way, up the wall, you can see that imperfection right there. That is a screw hole. It's hard to do a perfect job everywhere, so you're gonna find these. So that's a perfect indication that there's a stud here. So I could go up here, put a nail, hang a picture, do whatever I gotta do, and it'll be a lot better than guessing. So if all else fails and your house is built completely wacky, there's a lot of good sheetrock anchors out there that you can use. So if you already put a hole somewhere and you thought you were gonna hit a stud, use an anchor. Also, if you're hanging something that's large enough, you can always take a hammer and a nail and just, you know that there's going to be a stud somewhere around here. You can put a hole here, put a hole here, put a hole here, put a hole here until you find that stud, and then cover those holes up. I knocked, so the dog's going to bark. Hopefully that helped you out. You can check out some of my other videos here and here. And if this is your first time and you found value in this video, maybe hit the subscribe button and join me in my home repair adventure. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.